Okay, so this is part 4 of Benito Mussolini and the rise of fascism in Italy. I'm just going to repeat some of the stuff that was discussed in part 3. At the end of the First World War, Italy was feeling very, very humiliated, especially with the Treaty of Versailles, and there was a lot of frustration, a lot of upheaval, and especially with the government. And there was also socialist protests that were taking place. In this crisis, people in Italy wanted a strong leader, someone who's affirmative. The Italian government was constantly changing, different prime ministers were coming in and out of power, and there was no order. Socialists were seizing control. Mussolini was able to assemble former soldiers, convince many of the wealthy industrialists that he could put an end to the socialist threat. They financed him, he created his fascist party, he put down various socialist protests. But in the 1921 elections, his fascist party were only able to get 35 out of 535 seats. So again, no real majority in the government. But Mussolini decided he would have a different strategy, and he was going to march on Rome in October 1922. And he threatened the King of Italy that if they do not make him prime minister, his fascist army of black shirts would seize control of all government buildings. Now, the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, he could have sent the army, crush this uprising, but he was very worried about the popularity of Mussolini and the potential of a civil war at a time where, people were very frustrated with the Italian government. So he made Mussolini the prime minister. Now that Mussolini is the prime minister, he makes a lot of effort into not making the same mistakes that previous governments of Italy had made in the aftermath of the First World War. Like, Italy's been through about 6 different prime ministers in that very short time. So one of the laws he sought to pass is the Assemble law, which he aims to pass in 1923. And what this means is that it would give fascists 2/3 or more than 65 people in parliament, in spite of the fact that in the most recent election, they got probably about 25% of the vote. So there's no reason for them to have 2/3 majority in parliament. Giacomo Matteotti, the Socialist Party leader, stands up to Mussolini, accuses Mussolini's thugs of violence, intimidation. That's part of the reason they got power, criticizes this Assemble law, and is a real obstacle to Mussolini, and Giacomo Matteotti disappears. And his body is later found by about 1924. And this time there's a crisis. Mussolini at first denies his involvement in Matteotti's killing, even though it's kind of obvious that it's his fascist party individuals are behind it. Eventually, 3 people are accused of the crime, and one serves a short time in prison. But the king, people in this kind of frustration with Mussolini, various political parties are boycotting parliament, demanding that King Victor Emmanuel does something to Mussolini, but he decides to support Mussolini. And while individuals are boycotting parliament, Mussolini just basically creates his fascist one-party state, and he states he doesn't ever take responsibility for Matteotti's disappearance, but he does admit to violence, and he says that in the kind of turmoil that Italy finds itself, a leader strong like him is the only person that can actually bring about peace and order in Italy. And it ends up being kind of successful. And in fact, about this stage, he gets a request from a German individual named Adolf Hitler for a signed autograph, which Mussolini denies, but he becomes quite famous in this point in time. Now, during the tumultuous period that Italy found itself in the aftermath of the First World War, people were fed up of Italian weakness and the Italian government's so-called inability to deal with crisis. And Mussolini, once he became prime minister, was able to show, in spite of his thug-like methods, his suppression of democracy, he was at least a strong leader who was able to assert Italian nationalism and Italian pride. And this could be illustrated in something that happened even before the disappearance of Giacomo Matteotti. Now, before Mussolini became prime minister, straight after the First World War, when the territorial promises that were made to Italy during the First World War were not granted after the Treaty of Versailles, there was an Italian poet, Gabriele D'Annunzio, and he took a bunch of former soldiers and they captured Fiume. And this was praised by Italians, and they were very proud of this. They're gaining a nice set of territory for Italy. But the League of Nations intervened. They spoke to Yugoslavia, and they made an agreement that Fiume would become an independent state, and Italy was forced to give it up. The Italian army sent troops to put an end to Gabrielli's regime in Fiume. And the Italians were absolutely furious at this, that the government actually sold out Gabrielli. When Mussolini became prime minister, he was able to do something. So what happened is that Albania and Greece were fighting over disputed territory, and Mussolini was supporting Albania. So he sent a team of 5 to go and intervene. The team of 5 were murdered. Mussolini blamed the Greeks. The Greeks said they did not do it. He demanded money. The Greeks refused to pay it. Mussolini sent the navy to conquer Corfu Islands. League of Nations tried to intervene. Mussolini threatened that he will withdraw Italy from the League of Nations, and the League of Nations actually got worried about that, and they began to make concessions to Mussolini, who then had bargaining power over Greece, was able to come up with an agreement that suited his terms, and then in that position of power, he went to Yugoslavia, and he got Yugoslavia to agree to give him Fiume. So it's little things like this made Benito Mussolini very, very popular amongst the Italians. After the disappearance of Giacomo Matteotti, when Mussolini basically said this is a one-party fascist state, he then put an end to any newspapers that spoke ill of Mussolini and his fascist regime. He put an end to political opponents, imprisoned them, took control of the media, and set about creating his fascist Italy. And some of his economic policies, his battle for grain, which tried to put an end to farms that were growing not put an end to farms, but it was a promotion of wheat to make Italy self-sufficient and able to produce a lot of wheat. But it was taking farms which had been growing other vegetables and making them grow wheat. Actually, in the long run, bad for the economy. He had the battle for land, draining swamps, various things. And these economic policies were not good long term, but they were good in portraying to the people that Mussolini was the type of leader that was very hands-on, trying to make Italy powerful, self-sufficient. School children were sought to write poems and school activities praising why Mussolini is so great and things like that. But in 1929, 2 events are going to happen that's going to make Benito Mussolini very popular.